Hi, this is Mike Peterson from Challenge Island, Oakland County. He's back with another one of our Steamtastic Fridays. So we're in the middle of our second 5-week series here at the Steam Railroading Institute of Owosso, Michigan. So if you missed our video last week, be sure you check that one out for some very important safety information regarding railroads and railroad trains. What we'll get into today is the T of STEAM, which stands for technology. So there was a lot of technology that went into making trains work. You can check out our earlier video for more about the train itself and that technology. In today's video, we'll talk about the communication that was so important for making trains work. So there's a lot of people, a lot of information needed to go back and forth for trains to know what they were doing, for train stations and train personnel to know what's going on. So for that, I'd like to introduce my friend Dean, who's also a volunteer here at the SRI, to tell us a little more about how all that communication technology developed to make the train industry possible.
Hey, thanks, Mike. Nice to see you again. Hi, everyone. So today we'll talk a little bit about communication technology and how it changed over the 150 years of railroad history. You might think it's a little odd to be talking about communications at a railroad museum. You might think it's more appropriate for a computer or telephone museum. But in reality, the railroads used advances in communication technology quite extensively. If you go back to the 1830s, about 180 years ago, 190 years ago, when railroads were new, the short line between two cities may have only had one locomotive, and so communication really wasn't a big deal. But as soon as that started to prosper and grow, and the railroad picked up a second locomotive, more trains, somebody had to know where all those trains were, and they had needed a way to communicate with the crews that were out on the road if there was a change to their orders or a change to the plan for the day. And so the way they initially did that was through the use of the telegraph. In 1844, a man named Samuel Morse, he was not by training an engineer or inventor, he was actually an artist, which I just learned thanks to some research Mike passed along to me. Samuel Morse saw a need for faster communication. He received a letter about an illness of a family member, and it came too late. The handwritten note that was delivered, by foot and by horseback back then, arrived too late for him to react or to do anything about it. So he started to think about there had to be ways to make communication quicker. And he came up with a system known as the telegraph. Basically using electronics and a series of wires that were spread out between towns. A telegraph operator could use a telegraph key, similar to this one here, and they would tap out a message. He created Morse code. And Morse code still exists today. We still know that it's a series of dots and dashes, or long and short taps, that would be transmitted by wires to the other end or the receiving station, where that pattern would be repeated on a repeater such as this. And the operator there would be listening for those dots and dashes, or the long and short bursts of electrical energy. And they would, using Morse's code, they would write out the message. Railroads saw this as a way to keep track of their trains. So they started placing stations every 6 to 8 miles as the railroads started to fill in from the coastline into the eastern half of the country. Telegraph lines followed them, and they would have a station agent and a telegraph operator, again, every 6 to 8 miles, which gave the area farmers a roughly 3 to 4 mile radius, or about an hour's walk or journey by horse into town to drop off milk or grain that they had harvested that day, pick up packages from the Sears Roebuck catalog, pick up their mail. No matter how fast we travel, it seems like about an hour is a reasonable commute. So the railroads started placing these stations every 6 to 8 miles along the tracks. And then a dispatcher in a big city could send out messages to that telegraph operator using the telegraph They would type out changes in orders and pass them up to the passing trains as they went by their station. If they had planned on meeting another train at a certain spot, but maybe that train was running late, they'd tell it to go ahead and go a little further down the line, and they would meet that, they would find that train waiting for them at a different city. And so the station agent would type out the order on either handwrite it or type it out on a typewriter and pass it up to the moving trains as they came by. So the telegraph then really became the internet of the 1800s, and it continued that way until houses were equipped with telephones later on after Alexander Graham Bell, after 1876 and into the 1920s it took to really string telephone and lines into individual homes. And then that slowly started to replace the telegraph as the primary means of communication. So another way the railroads used communication technology was communicating with their employees. Again, think about a time before there was a telephone in every home. A village or a city like Owosso had a number of people that worked for the railroad, and they would need to be contacted when it was their turn to go to work. Most of the division points or major terminals on a railroad probably had a pegboard, something similar to this. This is the actual Ann Arbor Railroad dispatch board and it was used up into the 1960s. It shows names of all the different engineer, firemen, brakemen, or conductors who would be going out on trains. As they came in, the office clerk would move their name to the bottom of the list and move everybody else up. So that was how they kept everybody in order of when it was their turn to go out on an extra run. And when they had enough cars to go to either Toledo or the boat docks at Frankfurt, and they were going to schedule another train, they would then have to send out somebody to run through town. A crew caller would then have to scamper through town on bicycle or foot to that person's home to contact them, to let them know that they were up in a few hours, that it was their turn to go out on a run. Nowadays, of course, it's all done with computers and cell phone and text messages. But prior to that, the crew callers were typically young teenagers. Maybe they had quit school after 8th grade and had gone to work, and they could do little chores around the office, cleaning and sweeping and filing. And then they would also be used as a crew caller to go out into town to contact the crews when it was their turn to go out on a run. So.
All right, excellent, very good. All right, thank you, Dean. Yeah, it's fascinating to see how much technology really got started because of the need for the train industry to be able to grow and do so. So much of what we have today, internet, you can see, typewriters, computers, all that, really, a lot of it got its start in the train industry. Yeah, fascinating. All right, with that, thank you so much for joining us this week, and we'll look forward to having you back next time.